Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo. Okay, listeners, I'm quite excited about this third episode in my design methodology series. But moreover, I get to speak with Tracy Reese, a renowned fashion designer from Hope for Flowers, who has designed and dressed for First Lady Michelle Obama, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Oprah Winfrey. And as a side note, Tracy, my oldest daughter is a huge Michelle Obama fan, so she was very excited I was speaking with you today for this series.
Yeah, we're all huge Michelle Obama fans.
I have to also thank my friend Ashley Green with Detroit Core Detroit for making this connection. And for those of you who haven't heard of Design Core Detroit, please look them up on LinkedIn, as they do great events and are doing impactful things to promote design in and for the city of Detroit. Tracy, I so appreciate your time to discuss your design philosophy and methodology with my listeners. But before we get into all that, please tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. My name is Tracy Reese. I am a Detroit native. I grew up in Green Acres, which is near 8 Mile and Woodward. And I went to Detroit Public Schools all the way. Had a great childhood here in Detroit. And I went to school in New York for fashion design. So based on my Detroit Public Schools portfolio, I got a full scholarship to Parsons School of Design, which is the best design school in this country. And got a really good education there and started working in New York straight out of school. I learned so much, in school, but learned so much more on the job. And I was blessed to have a designer named Martine Sitbon, who is French, lived in Paris at the time as my design boss. So we got to travel back and forth to Paris for fabric fairs and to work with Martine, but we would literally work over the phone because this was before like the internet became everything. I was our company's telex operator in addition to my assistant design duties. So, we did everything. Everything was old school, but telex was not much different than email, except for you got a printed copy of every conversation. But that was a great first job for me. And then I left Arlequin, which was the name of the company, and started my own business when I was 23 years old at the urging of my dad. So my dad, Claude Reese, he worked for Chrysler here in Detroit all of my life, and he was only the second Black plant manager in the U.S. auto industry at Chrysler. And my mom, Pat Reese, was always a huge creative. She was a dancer and she taught modern dance at Wayne County Community College 3 days a week, always while we were at school. So she was always at home when we needed her, but she got to do her own creative thing as well. And we learned a lot from her in just terms of, living a creative life. My mom was, when they made mom, they broke the mold because she was very unique and ahead of her time. And I have two sisters, Leslie and Erin, and she raised us to be, really independent and kind of go after our dreams. And I think that it was a unique thing for women to be able to chase a career. And she really wanted that for us. My dad really didn't like her working full time. That's why she worked part time. And he probably would have preferred that she not even work part time. He was, pretty old school back in the day. He changed as time went on. He definitely thought that, it was best if she was home and available for us and running the household. So anyway, but she really encouraged us to, chase our dreams and have careers of our own. And my older sister was probably the first person in our family, not in our whole family, because our cousins also got a full ride to college. But our generation was the first generation not to have to work our way through college. And that was a big deal, So anyway, back to the plot. I have been working in fashion design since 1984. I've had 3 businesses. Hope for Flowers is my 3rd business. My 2nd business had the most longevity. I had Tracy Reese and another brand, Plenty, with my former business partners for almost 23 years, which is kind of a record in our industry. And it was a great business. It was in the contemporary area of women's fashion, which means it was somewhat affordable. It was nowhere near as inexpensive as fast fashion, but at the time, I guess, one of our dresses would retail for about $375. And I was able to travel the world to work with wonderful artisans all over the place. We had Japanese distribution. We had retail stores in New York and in Tokyo. We had a shoe license, handbags and belts. We had licenses for the home. So we did sheets and towels and what have you. And it was magical, but it was a lot of work. And, we had a great team of people working with us, but it was also, a ton of responsibility. So in 2018, our business was shrinking. And, when fast fashion entered the conversation, which was, I would say, started around 2012, 14, it really threw our industry into turmoil. And it has been almost the breaking of the fashion industry as I see it. It's changed the game. I mean, there was a time when, you saved up for things that you loved because you loved them, and you didn't buy as many items every year. I mean, I think right now the average American buys about 68 items of clothing in a year. And, we used to buy maybe a dozen, or maybe 15, and we buy things and throw them away. But, I think we've lost sight of what quality is. We've lost an appreciation for craftsmanship. We've lost I think in the mad dash to always have something new, we've lost sight of the true value of handcrafted items. And that's really changed our industry. And it was part of the reason why my old business definitely shrunk. Our stores started having to compete with fast fashion. And I'll never forget having an appointment with a large department store that was a good partner to us. And at the time, our Plenty collection, which was less expensive than Tracy Reese, we were retailing a blouse for about $158. And we had, flown in for an appointment with management of this department store. And they said, we love the line. It very much, reflects what our customer loves to wear and buy. But our sweet spot for blouses is $79. And we find that when a customer comes into the store and, she sees a blouse she likes for $79, she'll buy 2 instead of just 1. And I remember sitting in that appointment thinking, in what universe does this make sense? It's the same money, but we were shipping a quality product and, working with factories that paid a living wage, whereas they had, started working with fast fashion type brands, and they had brought their prices way down in the department where Plenty was hanging. And that was just, one example of what had started to happen in the industry. And it really decimated the contemporary category in women's fashion, because you could get the look for a lot less, not the quality, not the craftsmanship, but you could get the look for a lot less. And this was something new and bright and shiny for customers. So you could have a customer carrying, a $2,000 Gucci purse, but, maybe she's wearing a $99 Zara dress, so a lot of it wasn't even about what people could afford. It was just this new thing that meant you could have more and change your look often. Also, the internet changed everything, and social media changed everything, where people wanted to show themselves wearing something new all the time. So long story short, our business reduced in scope and size and everything. And we were trying to decide what to do next, how to pivot. And my partners were being advised that we should jump into the fast fashion game and start making, greater quantities of less expensive items. But I knew that it wasn't even our core competency to do that. And when you do the math doesn't math unless you're a behemoth like H&M or Zara and you've got, stores all over the world. So we decided to part ways. I was also learning about sustainability, and I was learning about our industry's footprint in terms of climate and also supply our value chain. When you're making fast fashion and expensive items, most likely the people who are executing and who are sewing these items are living under the poverty line, and they're not making a living wage. Far from it. I mean, the average wage in Bangladesh is I think it was raised to about $150 a month. So how frightening is that, right? And there's a lot of backlash. I mean, they've been, protesting, trying to get wages up to $212 a month. But the government, raised it from 110 to 150. And they really came down hard on protesters. So I don't want to be a part of that type of system. I want to, create and be a part of a system that honors skilled craftspeople. I want to work with textiles that are not harmful to the planet. So I was lucky. I was accepted into a program that was part of CFDA, which is the Council of Fashion Designers of America. Lexus Automobiles was sponsoring. And it was a 9-month crash course in sustainable design. I learned so much. And I had to write a blueprint for how I wanted to change my business or launch a new business. And to be honest, I felt like it was easier to launch a new business than to change the whole value chain of the old business. Also, its size and scope. Hope for Flowers is a much smaller business than my previous business, and that suits me. I don't have to be everywhere. I want our products to be a bit more exclusive. I want to market them to people who care about the planet, who care about craft people, who are interested in sustainability. And the other part of my blueprint was I wanted to do something in Detroit. And I really felt that it was possible to launch this business in Detroit. We don't have to be in New York for everything. Plus, our proximity is so close that you can go to New York anytime you want to. That was my plan. And that was the basis for what Hope for Flowers is. I wanted to have community impact alongside our design business, our wholesale business. And I wanted to be able to offer arts education to young people living in Detroit, going to Detroit public schools, because that landscape has changed so drastically from the time that I was in school and had a plethora of art classes all the way through K through 12. Now, a lot of schools don't even have a dedicated art teacher and music teacher. Maybe they have one or the other, and some schools actually have one of each for the entire school. So it's not the same as it was when I was in school, and I wanted to be able to offer opportunities for young people so that they could find themselves in creativity, but also so that we could leverage and layer in some lessons on sustainability, because it's not a conversation that is had enough, and especially not with young people, and especially not in inner cities. So at Hope for Flowers, we have a whole artisan studio that is dedicated to community engagement, and that houses our youth art enrichment classes, which are held on Saturdays, and also our adult art enrichment, which we have workshops that are 4 weeks at a time on different disciplines, and those are on Thursday evenings here. And then we do community workshops around sustainability, just sharing sustainable life tools that are accessible to everyone. And, I believe if people have agency to participate in, saving this planet and, appreciating the work of craftspeople, valuing things, understanding what quality is, learning how to mend their own clothes, how to save energy at home, how to recycle properly, how to compost food waste. All of these things are accessible to everybody. It doesn't have to be expensive. So that's what we're doing here at Hope for Flowers. And, we've been operating here in Detroit for 5 years. Our programming has been going on for 3 years. We launched full out after some of the craziness of the pandemic eased. And I'm excited every day. I'm thankful to get up and come here and do this work.
That was an amazing background, Tracy. That's a lot to unpack. And to say the least, quite impressive, especially how you describe your parents. Obviously, a lot of that is stemmed from your upbringing, it sounds like.
Definitely. And, it's funny. And I think anybody who's gone away to school will appreciate this. It's, like within days, the value of your upbringing, when you're in a dorm, and there were a lot of wealthy kids at Parsons, but I felt like, I just knew they hadn't been raised like I was raised. And It made a difference in how they navigated being in New York, how they navigated, school and the demands of the curriculum and just life. And not that I had it all together, but I knew who I was, and I'm so thankful to my parents for that.
Yeah, that's a important foundation for sure. So let's get into the meaty part of this, Tracy. Can you walk the listeners through sort of your design approach and your methodology? How do you approach sort of a new project, or in your case, a new garment or a dress or whatever it happens to be?
Well, first of all, Scott, I make a nice cup of coffee.
I totally relate. I'm an espresso guy. I totally relate to that.
Right? A cup of coffee means something exciting is about to begin. And, that started in school. I was 17 when I went to Parsons, and we weren't allowed to drink coffee at home when I was in high school. And so it was a really grown-up thing to go to a deli and get a regular coffee, as they called it, which meant I was hot milk and sugar or cream and sugar is a regular coffee. And you could get that for like 50 cents. And that was in my budget. But it meant, that I was about to get down to business and be creative. And so I was having this conversation with somebody else the other day. It's like, I drink decaf mostly now, but I still like to have a cup when it's time to start sketching or time to, work on colors or prints or write an outline for a new collection. So for me, how I approach design has changed over the years. I think in the beginning, it was really, I was taught by Martine Thibon in my first job. She would come up with themes for the collections, and we'd be on the phone or whatever, and she'd say, I am feeling for heraldic. I want you to go to the library and do some research on, heraldic themes. And we would do a bunch of research, and then she would send me to the New York Public Libraries, the picture collections. I would go to Parsons Libraries and FIT, and I would photocopy imagery from like old Vogue magazines from whatever decade we were into. She loved the 30s, the 1930s, as do I. She loved the 1970s. So she would have me photocopy imagery from the picture collection and old magazines. And I would literally send her, we know how long ago this was. There was no Google, there were no drives or anything like that. I would send her a packet of photocopies through USPS Express service. I would send it to Paris and we would talk about, research together. And she would give me sketching assignments, and we would go to Paris and with my New York boss, and I would go and we'd attend a giant fabric fair called Première Vision, which means first look. And it was an incredible fabric fair, still exists twice a year in Paris, but they have offshoots all over the world. And all of the best mills from Italy and France and Switzerland and you name it would be there with their new fabric collections. And that's where, we would get tons of inspiration because, there would be a huge, trend presentation, mohair is big for fall, or metallics are going to be popular, or brocade is super important. And we would get busy trying to find suppliers that had, these key trend fabrics within our price point and make selections for the upcoming collections. And I worked that way. That's how I was taught. I worked that way for like 30 years. Love going to the big fabric fairs, love seeing all the innovation and, talking about trends and color and all of those good things. But when I launched Hope for Flowers, I have a mission to work with only sustainable textiles. And that means we work with a lot of organic cotton and organic linen. We work with some cellulosic fibers like lyocell, tencel, and these are all made from sustainably forested wood byproducts. And it kind of really shut down all of that incredible textile exploration. And a lot of the most gorgeous textiles actually are polyester based, and polyester is petroleum based. It is a fiber that, will not disappear. It's plastic, so these polyester and nylon textiles will be on the planet forever. And it doesn't mean that you absolutely cannot use them, but if you do, you sure better make something that will last and stay relevant, for decades, if not centuries, because the fabrics are going to be around for that long. And that's part of the toll that fast fashion is taking. You can buy, $1 a yard polyester. You can buy $100 a yard polyester. It really depends on what it is, who's making it, and what attributes it has. And a lot of the cheap stuff is just in landfills, all over the world, and especially in the third world. And it's egregious, what we're doing and how much we're wasting and throwing away stuff that just won't go anywhere. If you burn it, then it releases all kinds of toxins into the soil and the air. So all of that aside, when I launched Hope for Flowers, I still was going to the fabric fairs for inspiration, but I was so frustrated that there was so little that I could actually use. And part of that too is just the cost of import and export and minimum structures. In my old business, we could, support a 300 meter minimum and make something custom or get our own colors. And we would do custom woven fabrics. We would do custom jacquards, you name it. Everything was customized to the brand. But with Hope for Flowers, I'm realizing how wasteful that approach can be. And also it's a smaller business. So I'm not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed that I'll be able to support a large minimum for any textile. So I'm working with things that are accessible, that also have certification, that they are organic, that they are made in a way that is not harmful to the planet as much as possible. So I'm working with a small pool of fabrics instead of I can't even begin to tell you how many fabric swatches we would order back in the day. We would get packages every day from mills all over the world, and we'd probably have 1,000 fabrics to choose from for one collection. Here, I'm working with 5. And it's like I'm looking at those fabrics thinking, how can I make these fabrics, which sometimes look a little humble, how can I make them special? How can I make them unique? So that's one, starting with components, with materials. But the other thing I've learned through the years is the customer is always front and center. And, I can design all kinds of stuff and have a lot of great ideas and do things that are trendy or that I'm excited for, but it might not be right for my customer. And so with Hope for Flowers, where I'm trying not to waste, trying not to overproduce and over design, it's more important for me to get to the point and really look at what my customer needs, what it's been proven that she likes to buy from us, and kind of expand on that as much as possible. And it's funny, I'm trying not to reinvent the wheel every season. We've got one shirt that we started selling 3 years ago. This shirt always sells out. And I took it off the line one season and I was just tired of it. And I was thinking that the customer would be tired of it too. And people came into our booth at our trade show and they were like, "Where's the shirt?" And I realized that how silly it was to abandon something that people loved. I should be looking at it and figuring out ways to reinvent it every season and keep it fresh. And, these are lessons learned, over decades of a career. I think every designer always wants to do new things and challenge the customer in new ways. But it's important to also meet your customer where they are. And I've always felt that it was important that the clothing I make, the things that I design, are flattering to women's bodies in different shapes and sizes. And, that's always going to be important to me. But looking at, what is easy for her, what is, still exciting, or, hopefully she's looking at it thinking, I absolutely love that. And I'm going to buy that and keep it and wear it for a long time. And I have customers, who bought my old brands and, I meet them all the time and they're like, I have some of your dresses that I bought, 15 years ago and I still wear them. And I love those stories. It's important that these pieces are loved, that they make you feel good, that they serve a purpose in your life, so it's not just something that, you wear a couple of times and kick to the curb. You should, want to pull that out every time you have a special occasion or you want to feel a particular way or look a particular way. And the quality of it should stand the test of time. So, the customer has always been important, but she's very much front and center in this business and in, everything that we do here at Hope for Flowers. So those are two key things, textiles and customer. But what's also important, for me is that we have fun. I love color. I'll sit down and build color cards. I've got like collections of color swatches that I've been building for decades. And it's like, oh, I've always loved this shade of like shocking pink. And when am I going to put it with this season? So I build color cards and we still come up with themes and start to do research and think about pattern because it takes a while to develop print and pattern. And that's one of my hallmarks is, really pretty prints. So we develop them in-house here. And I have assistants who are really good in Photoshop. I am not, but I can definitely tell them what I want to see. And every now and then, we pick up a paintbrush and paint something because it's like it doesn't exist yet and it's in your mind. And, you can sort of bring it to fruition if you can have faith in your hand in the brush. So we develop a lot of prints here in-house and then start sketching. A lot of times I will have all of the fabric developed before I put pencil to paper in terms of sketches, but sometimes it goes the other way around. Sometimes it's congruent. It really depends on what the inspiration for the collection is and, what kind of look we're trying to achieve. If we're doing like prints that have, unique placements, then we have to sketch alongside of that print development. So everything is working together. So we do all those things. And then we do a lot of technical work, creating specifications for our factory. So we have to draw everything out and put in every single measurement and all of the finishing details. We create tech packs where we define all of the components, what size zipper, what kind of zipper, what color zipper, is there smocking, what color thread are you using? Are you using 3 colors of thread or 1 color of thread? Does it close with snaps or does it close with buttons? All of that stuff. So we define, that's a continuation of the design process. We define all that for the factory, and then they make prototypes. Sometimes I correct them from images. And we found that it saves us a lot on shipping, and that cuts our carbon footprint quite a bit if we're not sending samples back and forth to China. But sometimes they have to come in here so that we can fit them on a model and, resolve particular issues for more complex styles. And then the samples are made in the actual fabrics, shipped here to Detroit so that we can start preparing to show them to our buyers.
That was very insightful. Thank you for that. It's interesting because the last couple guests I've had for this series, in a very similar fashion, have been very client-centric, which is good to hear. And there's, I guess, no way of getting around that. And I really do appreciate, Tracy, your sort of conceptual approach to your design. The one sort of key word that I honed in on a couple times that you've said is inspiration, which is obviously key to being a designer. And you kind of touched on it early in your example when you were a young designer doing research. But what are some of the things that inspires you?
It depends on the season. We're actually starting to work on spring 2026. And luckily, say today is a sunny day and that spring is hopefully around the corner, and that's enough to inspire. I love being inspired by nature. There's a lot of fine art that I find really inspiring. There's certain artists that I follow on social, or, if we go to a museum or a gallery. I was in a gallery in New York a couple of weeks ago, and this artist, her work was inspired by textiles, and she had these giant paintings that looked like woven baskets, and we had been doing some research on, basket weaving and chair seats that are made with rattan or other materials that are actually woven, and that's inspiring some textile designs. So you kind of start to go down a rabbit hole. You do a little research here, and that opens a window there. And it's like, oh, but that would go really good with this. And a lot of times I'm inspired by interiors. It's really about how all the pieces fit together. And I think since we do a lot of pattern design, I'm always looking for unique pattern ideas. It could be historical. We were looking at a lot of old book designs, like book cover designs, and a lot of them had, these sweet little prints. And it's just like, oh, we could take inspiration for that. I could wear that little book cover, would make a really cute blouse, So it's like, it comes from all over the place. And it's usually, you're going down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden, all of these ideas sort of come together and they shape up and they're friends with each other, and it starts to feel like a collection.
That's great. Aside from the the inspiration, we're all, I think, in our selected mediums of design, we have influences besides inspiration, and those have influenced us to do what we do and to be who we are. Who are some of your influences throughout your career and even now?
That's a good one.
I thought so.
Outside of my parents, and from them, it's creativity and work ethic. That's one thing. My grandma, my mom's mom, she was our grandma right here in Detroit. My other grandma was in Alabama, so we saw her less often. But my grandma here, we would see her almost every weekend, and she would take us on trips. And she was so elegant, and the way she dressed, she was always so put together. And when we weren't near, like for a couple of years, my dad's job was transferred to Indianapolis, and she would send us photos of herself, like wearing various outfits. And I always thought she was a movie star, but she was so beautiful and elegant at all times. And that was a huge influence. I think also, I have a lot of friends who are artists, their discipline, their work, the way they keep finding new meaning in their work and expressing that and pivoting when they need to or want to and creating really relevant work. That's a huge influence on me. Women who are my customers, they're very, that's a huge influence on me, meeting people and, understanding how they dress and why they're looking for particular things. That's a huge influence on me, and seeing them wear the clothes is really important. So comes from all over. There's historical influences. There's so many incredible women designers that I've been inspired by. And I find that in general, and I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but the work of women designers in apparel, I find to be a little more realistic and thoughtful, because I think you're the customer, and I think there's a greater focus on the usefulness of the items, the wearability. And a lot of times with males designing for women, they have to use their imagination a lot, and sometimes that customer is on a pedestal or she's more of a muse, and maybe what they're designing is more, I don't know, fantasy is not the right word. It's often conceptual, but a lot of times it moves the conversation forward, but maybe the pieces themselves aren't meant for everyday use. So it's a kind of a different approach to creating products. And I've always been very pragmatic and very, down to earth in terms of my approach. I really want the things that I design and make to be worn by people from all walks of life.
And that's interesting. Getting back to one of the points you made earlier when you're doing your background, how difficult is it to compete with sort of some of those big box stores that you mentioned? You mentioned H&M at the beginning. And, obviously the high fashion, I can't say because I don't know enough about it for it to be some of the more male-dominated designers. Is that a thing? Is that true? And I guess how would you unpack those two questions?
I don't feel like we need to compete with fast fashion. I don't think we should. It's its own category. There's nothing about it that I admire. And, I'm hoping, and it's my job also to educate. I'm hoping the customer is educated enough to know the difference. And it's my job to teach also, what those differences are and why there's greater value in what we're doing. So, I'm not trying to compete with fast fashion. I never want to be that large. I wouldn't dream of trying to reach those types of prices, knowing the toll of that system. And 80% of garment workers are women, and 80% of those women are women of color. And most of them are living below the poverty line in order to make fast fashion. So, what I wanted to say to that buyer who told me that, if our blouses were $79, the customer would buy two, I wanted to say, well, the person who sewed that blouse, if she made $2 for sewing it, then, she was doing great, because in that system, that's what it boils down to, and is that okay with you? And I think, people really have to examine their choices and really, do some research into the value chain for some of these brands that they like or admire. So no competition there. Also, when we look at luxury fashion, that's a whole nother animal. Most luxury fashion is, owned or run by these giant conglomerates that have, deep pockets. They do tons of advertising. They put on very expensive runway shows and events all over the world. They have their own stores. They have, all the things. And that's not something I can compete with, and not trying to. So yeah, I'm not trying to be either. I'm trying to offer options in the middle, and something that is not overly distributed, where you don't see yourself walking up and down the street, where you can feel special, and hopefully products also that are doing their job and working for you.
Well said. And I think a lot of the statistics that you've thrown out in this episode have been both informative and alarming at the same time. But one question I wanted to ask you too is, given sort of your experience, and I mean, wow, what a breadth of experience, what advice would you give to somebody who, maybe a young lady that was getting into fashion design now, who's maybe in college or getting ready to approach the field? What advice would you give him or her?
Well, it's interesting. I talk to students a lot, and, our industry is at a crossroads, and we need, fresh thinking. I think that a lot of the way our industry operates is from a playbook that was invented 50 years ago, but the landscape has changed dramatically. So I'm hoping that young designers and young people coming into this industry are looking at it in a more organic and holistic way, and looking to solve some of the problems that, and that we've gotten ourselves into. I mean, a lot of students are interested in circular fashion, really taking pieces that exist and redesigning them, just giving them new life and new energy, instead of, using brand new textiles and new components for everything. It's like, how can we work with what we have? I mean, we know that, there's enough clothing on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations. That's a crazy, crazy figure, so it's challenging to design in a circular way. And by circular, I mean, from cradle to grave, basically there is no grave. How do we keep the pieces that we're making in circulation? How do we give them new life? How do we repair? How do we revive? All of those things. That's a big conversation amongst people who are trying to work sustainably. So, we're really looking to the next generations, and a lot of young people, they really care. A lot of people aren't as focused on fast fashion and getting more stuff. In terms of the students that I've met, they're really interested in doing something that has greater meaning. And they don't have to, they're not necessarily looking for, I call it world domination, some of these giant brands that are absolutely everywhere. It's like that thinking, I think, is getting a little tired. So, everybody isn't meant to have a global brand. They're like trillions of brands already out there. So, if you're going to enter into this saturated market, what are you bringing that's different? What are you bringing that has meaning, that's unique, can convince people to part with their hard-earned dollars to own? So new thinking, don't come in and feel bound by old rules. Create your own.
Ooh, I like that. That's a really good one to end on, and good advice for, I think, anybody in any design field. One last question to you, Tracy. What kind of music do you like, and who are some of your favorite artists musically?
Eclectic. I like all kinds of music every day. It depends on my mood. I mean, day before yesterday, it was Alice Coltrane, something about John Coltrane. We lost Roberta Flack a few weeks ago. And so I was on a Roberta Flack bender. Today I'm listening to Feist, and I was like, where did Feist go? And then there's this album out there that I didn't know about. So I was listening to that. I love St. Vincent. I love old Prince. I love some new Doechii. I love it depends. Every day it's a little something different depending on mood and what I'm working on. Sometimes you need like a palate cleanser, and I'll listen to classical piano, because it's like, okay, enough. I can't have like anything that feels like noise. I love Esperanza Spalding. So yeah, eclectic.
I would agree. Well, Tracy, this was an absolute pleasure. And I again have to thank Ashley for connecting us. This was a fantastic interview, and I certainly appreciate your time. And I'm going to definitely put it in the promo material where people can find you, but what is going on? Where can people find you? And especially, how can they get engaged with some of the nice things you're doing with Hope for Flowers?
Sure. You can go to hopeforflowers.com, and our collections are posted there. Past collections, present collections are for sale on our website. Our programming is also on our website. So if you go across the toolbar to programs, everything that we're doing is listed there. You can register for classes. Our products are also sold. Our collections are sold at about 50 specialty stores across the country. So we've got, a fair amount of saturation. Well, saturation is a strong word, but we've got some great stores up and down the East Coast and Southeast, a little bit in the West. We also sell to Anthropology. Unfortunately, we're selling to Saks, but they've had some financial challenges. So we've had to pull back from that relationship for the moment, but hopefully they'll come out on the other side and take a look at us again. But we've got some really great specialty stores all over the country that carry the brand. So DM us, ask us if there's someone in your neighborhood, but definitely check out our website, hopeforflowers.com.
Appreciate that. And everybody should check it out. I've checked it out several times, and the work is beautiful, I have to say. So I definitely appreciate that. Any last words for the listeners, Tracy?
I think I've said it all. I hope people enjoyed it. And, look, I'm someone who feels very blessed and grateful to be able to do what I love for a living. And I guess that's my parting word.
And that's a good one. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Scott. Have a great day. Going into a fitting now.
Thanks again, Tracy, for your design methodology and your insight into a very fascinating design field. Now, fashion is a field that's always intrigued me, and I'm so grateful to have connected with you, Tracy. But I would once again be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my friend, Ashley Green from Design Core Detroit, for that connection. So where do we go from here? Well, Tracy gave us some interesting takeaways during this episode, and I'm sure you have your own, but I'm reminded by the following points. Fast fashion disrupted quality and ethics in fashion industry. Tracy chose sustainability and ethical labor over scaling through fast fashion. Sustainable design means constraints and intentionality. Customer focus and timeless design are central to Tracy's philosophy. As always, I appreciate your continued support for Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo. And don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends, as you'll all want to catch my next episode in the series, which I will be talking with my longtime friend and soccer teammate, Steve Rost, on his design methodology surrounding photography and all things art in general. Now, as a reminder, this podcast can always be heard on any of your favorite podcast and music listening platforms. And keep those questions and show ideas coming at my podcast email, catalloscott@gmail.com. Now for the background music for this episode. I love the eclectic range Tracy has. However, Roberta Flack definitely resonated as I love her voice. Therefore, for the background music, I created an instrumental version of Killing Me Softly, one of her biggest songs. Till next time.